The envelope wasn't meant for me. His name wasn't mine, his handwriting unfamiliar, and yet I opened it. In the middle of the storm that was Normandy, that letter became the only quiet place I had left. Tonight, I'll tell you how a stranger's words kept me alive in a war trying to break us both. Normandy, June 1944. It's June 21st, 1944. I remember the date not because it was special, but because if you didn't keep track of the days, you'd lose track of yourself entirely. The air out here near the coast was always damp, heavy with the smell of wet canvas and churned up earth. Even weeks after the initial landings, the noise hadn't stopped. It just changed pitch. Before the war, if you'd asked me to describe chaos, I'd have talked about a busy shift back at St. Jude's in Boston. Maybe a 10-car pileup on the freeway. That was orderly, though. That was predictable chaos. This was something biblical. I'm Beatrice Anderson, though most people just call me Nurse B. I signed up the second I could. I wanted to serve. I wanted to be useful. Back then, the pamphlets showed clean hospitals, crisp uniforms, and smiles. They didn't show the mud that swallowed your boots past the ankles. They didn't just show the exhaustion that seeped into your bones until you forgot what sleep felt like. We were running a field hospital, a collection of large tents set up hastily in a field that smelled faintly of old manure and ocean salt. The surgical tent was the heart of the operation. It beat constantly, driven by adrenaline, fear, and sheer will. Outside, the generators hummed a low, mechanical tune that was the closest thing we had to silence. I kept a small diary, or really a journal tucked under my cot. It was just a thin, battered book with a cheap cover. I wrote in it sometimes late at night, when the shifts finally died down, and the only light was the weak beam of my flashlight. It was the only way I knew to process the emotional weight of the war. Today had been a stretch of 12 solid hours with hardly a break. The steady stream of ambulances never seemed to fully stop, just slowed down to a trickle before surging again. We were treating every injury imaginable, though we were strictly forbidden from even thinking about the gruesome details. We focused on stabilization, efficiency, and moving the next patient through. That's how you survived. You became a machine of care. Around midnight, a truck arrived, not with new patients, but with supply crates and mail. Mail call was always an event. It was a tiny, fragile thread connecting us back to the world we had left behind. Sometimes seeing the familiar script of a mother or a sweetheart on an envelope was enough to make a tired man cry. Lieutenant Miller, who was usually in charge of distribution, dumped the canvas bag onto the small folding table we used as a makeshift desk in the administration tent. "Anderson, anything for you?" he asked, rubbing his tired eyes. Probably just another appeal from my Aunt Martha to come home and marry a nice dentist, I joked weakly. I started sifting through the stacks. There were letters for the surgeons, letters for the mechanics, and stacks for the men recovering in the general wards. I quickly found a few for the boys I was currently looking after, Private Hayes, who was desperate to hear about his new baby, and Corporal Jensen, who just wanted pictures of his dog. Then my fingers brushed against a stack of mail that was clearly misfiled. It was placed with the outgoing packages, but marked incoming. There were 3 envelopes tied together with a thin piece of twine. They were slightly crinkled, as if they'd traveled a long, difficult road. The handwriting on the front was neat, slightly looping, and unmistakably feminine. It wasn't my mother's, and certainly not Aunt Martha's. The name on the envelope caught my attention. Private First Class T.H. Jennings. The address was for a different company, several miles north of our current position. "Lieutenant Miller," I called, holding up the bundle. They seemed to be for a PFC Jennings in the 34th. Miller didn't even look up. "Jennings? Ah, yes. Those have been following him for weeks. Been passed around 3 outfits already." He sighed heavily. Look, Anderson, just put them in the dead letter pile. The 34th moved on. We got confirmation 3 days ago. Jennings, he's gone. I froze. The words hit me like a physical blow. Even though I didn't know the man, he's gone. It was a common phrase here. Too common. It was the terrible shorthand we use for the ultimate cost of this war. I looked down at the letters. They smelled faintly of cheap perfume and home. They were filled with hope and love things that had no place in the dusty, damp tent we currently occupied. I couldn't just drop them into the official dead letter box. That box led to nothing but a long, bureaucratic process ending in destruction. They would never reach the person who wrote them to confirm they had gone astray. I separated the bundle and tucked them carefully under the official roster I was supposed to be updating. My reasoning wasn't clear, but a voice inside me whispered that these letters deserved better than a canvas sack and an incinerator. They contained stories that still needed to be read. That night, after washing the endless stream of grime and disinfectant off my hands, I finally found a moment alone. The blackout curtain was drawn tight, and the silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant low rumble of artillery, was thick and heavy. I pulled out the 3 letters. I told myself I was just checking the return address, making sure there wasn't an easy way to send them back to the sender, but that was a lie. I was curious. I was desperately seeking some form of human connection that was uncovered in bandages or stained with iodine. The top letter had a postmark from late May. I slid my finger carefully under the flap. The envelope wasn't meant for me. His name wasn't mine, his handwriting unfamiliar, and yet I opened it. The paper was thin, blue, and smelled like dried flowers. The penmanship was beautiful, neat, and flowing. It wasn't formal military correspondence. It was intimate. May 28th, 1944, my dearest Tom. The lilac is finally blooming outside the parlor window, and when the wind blows just right, the smell fills the whole house. It's such a small thing, but it reminds me so much of that last summer evening we shared before you left. Do you remember? We sat on the porch swing until the stars came out, and you promised me we'd be back there soon. I know you can't tell me anything, and I don't want you to take any unnecessary risks for the sake of writing. But sometimes the silence here is deafening. The radio tells us things are moving, that the time is coming for the big push. My stomach twists whenever I hear the announcer. I try to keep busy. I've taken up knitting again, terrible scarves, mostly, and I spend my days helping Mrs. Gable at the Red Cross canteen. We serve the boys heading south. They look so young, Tom. They always look so young. Please know I think of you always. Every hour, every prayer, every small moment of peace I find is dedicated to you coming home safely. Write when you can, but only when you can. Forever yours, Evelyn. I sat there in the weak beam of my flashlight, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Evelyn. She sounded lovely, full of a quiet strength that women back home often possessed. And Tom, Private First Class T.H. Jennings, gone. I felt a profound, aching sadness. This tiny letter was a time capsule of hope that would now travel eternally, never reaching its destination. It was meant for a man who would never feel the lilac-scented breeze again. I didn't open the other 2 that night. I couldn't. I tucked them back under the roster, but this time I placed them closer to my cot. They were a secret now, my secret. The next few days settled into the brutal, familiar rhythm of the field hospital. The tents grew hotter during the day, making the smell of antiseptic and sickness almost unbearable. The air felt thick, like wading through warm soup. At night, the temperature dropped, and we slept fitfully, listening to the occasional mortar around land far off. My focus was on my duties. I administered medication, changed dressings, and held hands. I made small talk with boys who were too shell-shocked to speak coherently, and I kept a watchful eye on the supply levels. Every minute was filled with urgent, necessary work. But even in the middle of a shift, Evelyn's letter played in my mind. The lilac is finally blooming. It was such an ordinary, peacetime thought. I realized that reading those letters that described a world of normalcy and simple love, was an anchor for me. It reminded me that a future still existed outside the canvas walls of our camp. On the evening of June 25th, I had a precious half hour before I needed to check the late-night vitals. I sat down and pulled out the second letter. This one was postmarked June 4th, just days before the invasion. Evelyn still didn't know the immensity of the events unfolding just across the channel. June 4th, 1944. Dear Tom, we had a terrible storm here last night. The rain hammered the roof so hard I thought the chimney might blow over. It made me worry about you and how miserable it must be wherever you are. I hope you're dry and warm and that your sergeant isn't making you eat too much hardtack. Remember how you used to complain about the food? I saw your mother today. She was shopping at the butcher shop and she looked tired. We talked for a while. She asked me if I'd heard anything more concrete from you, and I had to tell her no. It breaks my heart how much she misses you. She showed me a picture of you when you were about 10, playing baseball. You had the biggest smile. I told her you were going to be fine, that you were the toughest man I knew. I hope I convinced her. I hope I convinced myself. I am keeping my spirits up. I am focused on planning our first weekend away when you return. I keep looking at that little cottage by the lake we talked about. It's silly, I know, but planning the future makes the waiting bearable. It gives the waiting purpose. I read somewhere that the British nurses are using old handkerchiefs to make dressings because the supplies are so low. I'm glad I'm not there, dealing with the realities of war. I admire their strength. I know you admire them too. Stay safe, my darling. Come home soon. Yours always, Evelyn. Glad I'm not there, I whispered, holding the letter. If only she knew. We were using ripped-up sheets and whatever salvaged material we could find ourselves. Field nursing was nothing like the orderly wards back home. Her letter gave me a startling perspective. Back home, the war was still an idea, a terrible necessity. Here it was the sound of groans, the taste of dust, and the constant smell of blood and diesel. But Evelyn was fighting her own war. The war of waiting, of imagining the worst while trying to plan a happy future. That silence she felt in her parlor. I was surrounded by noise, but I felt the same kind of essential silence. The silence of unspoken fears. The third letter arrived 2 days later with the next batch of mail. It was dated June 6th, the day we all knew as D-Day. I didn't wait until midnight to read it. I retreated to the small supply closet we used for keeping the morphine secure. It was the only place with a locked door. June 6th, 1944, early morning. Tom, I couldn't sleep. The news came in early this morning. The wireless was buzzing. They didn't say where, but everyone knows. The invasion has begun. I am terrified, I won't lie. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a great cliff and the wind is trying to push me off. I keep repeating your last words to me. I'll be back for that dance, Ev. Keep my card ready. I'm keeping it ready. My heart goes out to all the boys and all the nurses too, who are facing this head on. I love you. Stay strong. I am counting the moments. Forever, Evelyn. She had written this letter just before the news of the massive landings had truly sunk in, before the casualty lists began filtering back. And Tom, Private First Class T.H. Jennings, was likely already among the lost when this letter was dropped in the mailbox. I sat in the dark supply closet, the smell of sterile cotton and carbolic acid sharp in the air. I realized I couldn't just keep reading. These letters were a one-way street of pain. Evelyn would keep writing, filled with hope, and these letters would keep circulating until they eventually found their way to the discard pile. I had to do something. I didn't dare write to Evelyn. I couldn't tell her the truth. Imagine receiving a letter from a stranger, a nurse in Normandy, telling you your intended was dead. It would crush her. And besides, I wasn't even sure where she lived. The return address was just a post office box, but I needed to answer. Not for Tom, who couldn't read them, but for Evelyn. And maybe selfishly for me, to release the silent pressure building up inside. I pulled out my own worn diary. I tore a page cleanly out of the back, avoiding the pages where I had scribbled my own observations about the endless surgeries. I had a pen, a cheap standard issuing pen. I began to write, addressing the letter not to Evelyn, but to Tom. I knew this was irregular. It was insane. I was corresponding with a dead man, but I needed to write back, processing the emotional weight of the war through this strange proxy. My letter to Tom, June 25th, 1944, Dear PFC Jennings. It's Nurse Anderson here, writing from the administrative tent. We received your wife's, or maybe sweetheart's, letters. They are lovely, truly lovely. They speak of lilacs and rainy nights, and a world that feels incredibly far away from the canvas we are under. I read them and wanted to tell you that Evelyn is doing well. She is strong. She is helping out at the canteen and planning a trip to a lakeside cottage. She is holding up the home front for you. She was doing exactly what she needs to do. I know you can't read this, but I needed to tell someone that she is beautiful in her commitment. I needed to tell someone about the lilacs. It's been an exhausting day here. We had a rough influx from the fighting around Cherbourg. Our surgeons are running on pure coffee and patriotic fervor. The atmosphere is heavy tonight. The only light comes from the few flashlights we use for charting, and everything smells like mud and disinfectant. The distant artillery fire is like a low, persistent cough that keeps us all awake. I don't know why I'm writing this, or what I will do with it. I certainly can't mail it. Maybe I just needed a witness. A place to put the words that can't be spoken out loud. I hope wherever you are, that you are at peace. B. Anderson, ANC. I folded the letter carefully and placed it into a plain envelope. I didn't seal it. I knew I would probably burn it later, or maybe keep it. It was a ghost letter, a secret confession to a silent recipient. I returned the 3 letters from Evelyn, along with my own newly written reply, to their hiding place under the roster. The small bundle of paper felt intensely personal now. It wasn't just stray mail. It was a conversation between 3 people who would never truly meet. The weeks blend together as the days turned into weeks. The pace didn't slacken. The field hospital was constantly being dismantled and moved forward slightly, chasing the front. We were always operating just behind the sharpest edge of the conflict. The constant movement meant we were perpetually tired, perpetually reorganizing supplies, and perpetually losing track of things. This disorganized environment, ironically, was what allowed my secret correspondence to continue. No one bothered to check the dead letter sack I had started. Everyone was too busy keeping the living alive. I learned to cherish the short periods of relative calm. It might be a late afternoon where the clouds broke and the sun shone on the muddy field for an hour. It might be the brief window between the midnight shift change and the dawn surge. Those were the times I would pull out the letters. Evelyn's letters kept arriving. It seemed the postal service, bless their persistence, kept finding our general area. Each time Lieutenant Miller or a new courier dropped off the mail, I felt a familiar pang of dread and anticipation. The dread was for Tom, Private Jennings, who would never know the kindness and enduring love poured out onto that cheap blue paper. The anticipation was for the window into home that Evelyn provided. The details of home Evelyn wrote about her neighbors, the Smets, who finally got their victory garden planted despite the early frost. She wrote about the movie theater showing Casablanca again and how she went alone and cried in the dark. She wrote about the rationing and how she missed real butter. It was ordinary life, described in sensory detail that made the air in the hospital feel sterile and artificial by comparison. She was an atmospheric writer, painting pictures of quiet streets and the smell of fresh coffee. I realized I was relying on her descriptions. Her letters were an anesthetic for my soul. After reading her fourth letter, postmarked June 10th, 4 days after D-Day, I knew I had to respond again. Evelyn was moving from terrified anticipation to strained worry. She mentioned she hadn't received a letter from Tom in 3 weeks. This time, I was more reflective in my reply to Tom. I wrote about the weight of being a nurse, of trying to separate myself from the emotional cost of the suffering I witnessed. My second letter to Tom, June 30th, 1944. Dear PFC Jennings, Evelyn's last letter was full of worry. She mentioned the silence. I wish I could somehow bridge that gap for her, but all I can do is read her words and keep them safe. She is holding on to hope like a fragile glass in a hurricane. The truth is, Tom, it's not just Evelyn who is struggling with the silence. We deal with so much noise here, the trucks, the shouts, the moaning, but beneath it all, there is a profound silence. It's the silence of not being able to share what we see. The silence of knowing too much. Yesterday, we had a young boy, barely 18, with shrapnel wounds. He kept asking for his mother. We fixed him up, and he's stable, thank goodness. But his eyes, they look ancient. Sometimes I look at my own hands after a long shift, and I don't recognize them. They feel like they belong to someone much older, someone who has seen things that shouldn't have names. We try to keep morale up. We sing old songs, mostly off-key. Lieutenant Miller tells terrible jokes. We drink terrible coffee. We focus on the tiny victories. A stable pulse, a laugh, a promise that a boy will walk again. These are the things we build our days on. Evelyn mentioned you played baseball. I imagine you running the bases, full of energy and health. It's a clean, simple picture. I hold on to that. We all need these clean, simple images to counteract the mess we live in. I will keep checking the mail for Evelyn's letters. They are safe with me. B, Anderson, A, and C. I didn't try to find a way to mail my second letter either. It wasn't meant for external consumption. It was meant purely for processing. It was a journal entry disguised as correspondence. The field hospital moved again in early July. The engineers arrived, cleared the mud, and we packed up the entire operation. We were heading deeper inland, following the progress of the infantry. The move was chaotic, but I kept my small bundle of letters securely tucked into my personal kit bag. They were the only constant I had. July and the new routine. Our new location was near an orchard. The sweet, heavy smell of apples, slightly bruised and fermenting on the ground, mixed oddly with the hospital smells. The sun was stronger now, and the dust was replacing the mud. The workload remained relentless. The casualties from the dense hedgerow fighting were severe. We were often working 20-hour days, rotating only when we physically couldn't stand anymore. During a brief break on July 14th, I found another letter from Evelyn. This one had a different tone. It was brittle. The waiting was clearly beginning to take its toll. The fifth letter, doubt creeps in July 1st, 1944, Tom. I still haven't heard anything. It has been a terrible stretch of silence, and I try not to let myself imagine things. But the dreams are bad. Last night, I dreamt I saw you standing in the doorway, but when I ran to you, you were just a shadow. I spoke to the neighbors today. Mr. Gable keeps saying that no news is good news, but I don't believe him. I hate how polite people are. I hate the forced cheerfulness. I just want the truth. If you're safe, please just send a card, just one word. If you can't, then I will wait. But the waiting is starting to feel like a punishment. I saw a beautiful blue scarf today. It reminded me of your eyes. I bought it. I'll save it until you get back. Do you remember the day we got married? It rained, and we laughed because the church roof leaked right onto the minister's head. It seems like 1,000 years ago. Tell me you're coming home, Tom. I need to hear it. Love always, Evelyn. This letter twisted my heart. Her shift from gentle reminiscence to agonizing demand was clear. I just want the truth. That was the one thing I couldn't give her. The urge to reply was stronger than ever. I felt responsible for preserving her hope, even though I knew the foundation was gone. I decided I could give her a truth, a sanitized, general truth about the boys fighting, something to make her feel less alone. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't write anything that sounded like official correspondence or that revealed anything about Private Jennings' fate. I kept it emotional and reflective, focusing on the atmosphere of the field. My third letter, offering solace, July 14th, 1944. Dear PFC Jennings, Evelyn's last letter was difficult to read. She is lonely, and the silence is a heavy burden. I wish I could tell her that silence doesn't always mean the worst, that sometimes it just means movement or the impossibility of transmission. But I will keep her words safe. We moved camp again recently. We are near an apple orchard now. The fruit here is small and hard, but the smell is comforting. It reminds me that nature keeps going, even when we are trying to destroy everything around us. The fighting is fierce here through the hedgerows. It's close quarters work. The boys are tired, but they are also incredibly determined. They talk constantly about home, about their girls, their wives, their families. They carry your pictures in their wallets and your letters in their pockets. That's what keeps them going, Tom, knowing that someone is waiting, knowing that the world of lilacs and porch swings still exists, even if it's currently covered in dust. I see their courage every day, even when they are terrified. And I see Evelyn's courage, too. It takes immense strength to maintain faith when the world is giving you every reason to doubt. I am keeping that blue scarf she bought in mind. It's something to look forward to. Anderson, ANC. I kept writing, and the letters kept coming. This strange, silent correspondence became my therapy. I used these letters to Tom as a safe outlet for the exhaustion, the horror, and the moments of unexpected beauty I found while serving near Normandy. The staff around me noticed my quiet routine. They saw me scribbling late at night, but they assumed I was writing to my own family. In a way, I was. This makeshift family of correspondence provided a strange kind of intimacy in a world that had become brutally impersonal. The sixth letter, a sudden shift. The letter that arrived around July 24th was different. The handwriting was the same, but the tone was sharper, quicker. It was written on a postcard, not blue paper. July 18th, 1944, Tom. I received the official communication today. It was impersonal, cold. It said your status was missing in action. Not Dad, missing. I don't know what to do with that word. Does it mean you're hurt? Does it mean you're captured? Or does it mean they just don't know where your body is? The minister came over. Everyone keeps telling me to prepare for the worst, but I can't. I refuse. Missing means there's a chance. I am keeping the light on in the window. I am praying for confusion, for misidentification, for a miracle. I won't stop writing until they give me a final answer. Evelyn, the official stamp of missing in action confirmed. What I already knew, but it intensified Evelyn's plight. Now she was trapped in a bureaucratic limbo, suspended between hope and grief. I felt a surge of protectiveness over her latest letters. I knew that if the military found her letters, they would simply be cataloged and destroyed. I was holding on to the last vestiges of Tom's life and the final hopes of Evelyn. I wrote my fourth letter that night, sitting in the administration tent while the rain hammered the canvas roof, mimicking the noise of the earlier artillery. My fourth letter, The Burden of Hope, July 24th, 1944. Dear PFC Jennings, Evelyn has been notified of your missing in action status. She is carrying the burden of that uncertainty. I see that burden every day here, but on the faces of the soldiers who don't know what tomorrow will bring. We learn to live moment to moment. Today, I spent time talking with a young private who was shot through the arm. He was terrified, not of the wound, but of disappointing his father. He kept repeating that he failed. I had to remind him that surviving, that being repaired and sent home is not failure. It is the greatest victory. I see that same fear of failure in Evelyn's handwriting. She feels that if she stops hoping, she is failing you. I wish I could tell her that sometimes the greatest strength lies in allowing yourself to feel the loss, even the potential loss, but I know she has to fight this in her own way. Her refusal to surrender hope is its own form of bravery. We had a supply drop today. Someone managed to send us fresh oranges. Just the smell of the citrus was enough to lift the whole mood of the hospital. It was a brief, beautiful sensory interruption to the grime. These small things are everything. I am looking after her letters, Tom. They are safe. They are a constant reminder to me of what we are fighting for. Those small, perfect moments that make up ordinary life. B. Anderson, A&C. A new face. In early August, we received a new shipment of nurses and corpsmen. One of the new arrivals was a tall, quiet nurse named Margaret. She was from Michigan, and she had a no-nonsense demeanor that I admired. We were assigned adjacent cots, separated by a thin blanket hung from a wire. We rarely spoke during the day, too busy with work, but in the quiet hours, we sometimes shared a candle and some meager rations. One night, Margaret asked me about the small bundle of envelopes I kept under my cot. "Is that a correspondence course, Beatrice?" she asked softly. "No," I replied, pulling the bundle closer. "It's a secret. I didn't offer details." I couldn't risk explaining my relationship with the fallen Private Jennings and the grieving Evelyn. It sounded absurd, even to me, but the letters were too important to risk exposure. Margaret didn't press. She was a professional. She just nodded, understanding that everyone here carried a piece of private baggage. The atmosphere changes. The fighting was moving quickly now. The tension in the hospital began to shift from desperate triage to careful rehabilitation. We were starting to see more long-term cases. Men who needed months of care, not just a quick patch and send-off. This change of pace meant more time for reflection, which wasn't always a good thing. When you are too busy to think, you survive. When the pace slows, the reality catches up. Evelyn's letters continued. The frequency dropped slightly, but the content grew deeper. The 7th letter, remembering the past, August 5th, 1944. Dear Tom, I've been spending all my evenings sorting through your things. I know it sounds morbid, but it feels like the only way to feel close to you. I found your old baseball glove. It still smells like leather and dirt. I remembered the time you broke the neighbor's window trying to catch a fly ball. We were terrified, but you just laughed and offered to pay them back with your paper route money. You were always so honest. I also found the ticket stub from the night we went to the fair and rode the Ferris wheel. We were at the very top when the lights went out, and we were suspended there, staring up at the moon. You held my hand and said you wished we could stay right there forever, suspended between the earth and the sky. I feel like I'm stuck there now, Tom, suspended between the time we had and the time we won't. I still talk to you. I talk to your picture every morning. I tell you about the news and the weather. It helps. Don't give up fighting for yourself. Don't give up. Forever yours, Evelyn. Her memories were so vibrant. I felt like I knew Tom Jennings now, even though I had never met him. The honest boy who laughed at chaos. The man who wanted to be suspended between the earth and the sky with his sweetheart. I felt a responsibility now, not just to hold her words, but to acknowledge the beauty of the life she was describing. I had to write back to that life. My 5th letter, Reflections on Connection, August 10th, 1944, Dear PFC Jennings. Your wife wrote about the Ferris wheel. That image suspended between earth and sky is haunting. It feels exactly like this war. We are all suspended, waiting for the ride to stop, hoping we land safely. Sometimes I look at the stars here and they look so close, so clean. They don't seem to care about the bloodshed happening below. But then I remember that every single man here, every nurse, every driver, is connected to someone back home looking up at those same stars. That connection is everything. It's why you men keep fighting. It's why Evelyn keeps writing. And strangely, it's why I keep thinking about the lilacs. Margaret, one of the new nurses, is trying to teach us some French. It's hilarious. We tried to ask a French farmer if we could borrow some eggs, and we ended up asking if we could marry his chickens. We needed the laugh. The tension needs to be released somehow. I think of you and Evelyn together often. Those small, perfect moments you shared are far more real than the suffering we witness every day. I hold those memories for her. I promise to keep them safe. The Anderson, ANC. The field of paper, the field hospital settled into a kind of grim routine. We were no longer fighting the initial rush. We were fighting infection, recovery, and despair. I found myself spending more time with the men, listening to their stories. Their anxieties always centered on the same thing, home. I noticed how letters, even unanswered or old ones, served as tangible proof of their past and their future. They would pull them out, read them until the paper was soft, and then tuck them away. My bundle felt like a critical archive now. Evelyn wrote 2 more letters in late August. She was becoming very detailed about her plan for Tom's return. She was renovating their small apartment. She was picking paint colors, a soft yellow for the kitchen. This was her way of fighting back against the missing in action status. She was building a future, daring the war to destroy it. I knew that soon the flow of letters might stop. The Postal Service would eventually confirm his permanent status, or Evelyn would run out of strength. This thought gave my project urgency. I needed to write back, not just to release my feelings, but to acknowledge the dignity and courage of her sustained hope. The 6th letter, The Yellow Kitchen, August 28, 1944. Dear P.F.C. Jennings, I read about the Yellow Kitchen. It sounds lovely. That shade of soft yellow. I can almost picture the sunshine pouring onto the table. It's funny how in the middle of this gray, dusty war, we rely so much on color. The red of the cross, the green of the uniforms, the yellow of a future kitchen. The air here is changing. We can feel the shifting dynamics of the conflict. There's a cautious optimism spreading among the boys. We are winning. But that victory comes at an enormous cost, which we see every minute. I am dealing with a young man from Texas right now who is terribly homesick. He misses the sound of his mother's voice. I tell him to write. I tell him to write everything down. Letters are vital lifelines. They connect 2 worlds that are desperate to touch. I often think about Evelyn's commitment. She is teaching me a profound lesson about enduring love. It is not just the love that exists when you are together, but the love that persists when you are separated by distance and darkness. It's the love that keeps writing, even without an answer. I will keep checking the mail. I will keep the Yellow Kitchen in my mind, the Anderson, ANC. The bundle was growing thicker. It contained 10 letters now, 7 from Evelyn and 3 of my ghost replies. It was my emotional refuge. When the work became too heavy, when the smells and the sounds threatened to overwhelm me, I would think of lilacs, Ferris wheels, and a yellow kitchen. I never told Margaret or Lieutenant Miller or the surgeons about the soldier I was writing to. He was the soldier I loved without meeting. He and Evelyn represented the innocence and promise that the war was trying to destroy. I felt a subtle suspense building, not because of the external war, but because of the internal one. How long could I keep this up? What would happen when the final official word about PFC Jennings reached Evelyn? That day came in late August. The mail truck arrived, and Lieutenant Miller looked grim. He handled a stack of official-looking letters with unusual reverence. He separated the stacks, and then he pulled out a small, pale blue envelope addressed to T.H. Jennings. It was the latest letter from Evelyn. But underneath it, he found something else. A heavier, stamped envelope from the War Department. It was addressed to Evelyn, Miller's side. Anderson, he said, handing me Evelyn's personal letter. Put this one with the others. He held up the heavy official envelope. This one goes back to base to be rerouted. I think this is the last word for Jennings. I took the small white-blue letter from Evelyn. My hands were shaking. I knew what the official letter contained. It was the closure Evelyn had feared and awaited. I tucked her small letter away quickly. I didn't want to see what new grief she was expressing. Not yet. That night, I opened Evelyn's final letter. It was short, written on a torn scrap of paper. It wasn't about the kitchen or lilacs. The last letter, August 20th, 1944, Tom. I feel like I've been shouting into a canyon. The silence is unbearable. I haven't heard anything official yet, but I saw Mrs. Gable crying today. I think she knows. If you are truly gone, if you are reading this from somewhere better, please know that I loved you completely. Every moment. Every memory. If there is a chance, 1 in a million, that you're still alive, still fighting, please find a way home to me. I'll keep waiting, Tom. I promise. Yours forever, Evelyn. I didn't cry. Nurses rarely cried. But I felt the immense weight of the war press down on me until I could hardly breathe. The love contained in those envelopes was now officially orphaned. I sat in the dark, clutching the bundle. A conversation was over. The one quiet place I had left was gone. I pulled out my diary page. I knew this was the last letter I would ever write to PFC Jennings. My 7th letter, a soft cliffhanger, August 30th, 1944. Dear PFC Jennings, Evelyn is going to receive the final word soon. I saw the official envelope. I wish I could intercept it, hold it, and keep her suspended in that hopeful silence a little longer. But that isn't fair to her. She deserves peace, even if it is the peace of certainty. I have held your letters close. They have been my window. They have shown me the incredible fortitude of the people waiting at home, who are fighting their own invisible war. I realize tonight that I have processed more of my own feelings about this conflict through these ghost letters than I have through any other means. You became my confessor. Evelyn became my memory of beauty. I have gathered all the letters, now yours and hers. I am going to keep them. I don't know why. Maybe I'll carry them until the end of the war, until I can return them to a family member who might cherish them. Or maybe I will just keep them until I feel brave enough to destroy them. But there is one thing I must tell you. Something happened today after I read Evelyn's last note. Another letter arrived. It was addressed to you, but the handwriting wasn't Evelyn's. It was unfamiliar, rushed, scrawled on military stationery. I opened it immediately, hoping it was some bureaucratic error, a final confirmation from a comrade. It wasn't. The letter was from an army captain. It said he found some personal items left behind at an old aid station. He was attempting to return them. Among the items listed was a watch, a worn photograph of a girl with bright eyes, and a small, sealed bundle of letters. The letters he described, they were Evelyn's. The captain said they had been found, not discarded, but carefully wrapped in a piece of oilskin and tucked into a waterproof bag, addressed in your hand to Evelyn. He included a note saying that because the official status was changing, he would hold on to the items until a relative could claim them. But the captain also wrote one line that changes everything. Tom. He wrote that the items were found in the possession of an unnamed soldier being transferred to a German POW camp, who claimed they belonged to Private First Class Jennings. Unidentified, captured, and still holding Evelyn's letters. I don't know what this means for Evelyn's official letter or for your ultimate fate. I only know that the story isn't finished. And now I have to decide what to do with the 10 letters I am holding and the secret I now possess. I have to decide if I dare write to the captain, B. Anderson, ANC. The official envelope was sitting heavily on Lieutenant Miller's desk. It was beige, stiff, and carried the weight of the War Department's authority. It was the final word that Evelyn had been dreading and resisting. I saw it before I opened the small, light blue letter from her that I had tucked away. I didn't need to read the official stamp to know what it meant for PFC Jennings' status. The Army was closing the book on him, but my hand was trembling, not because of the official letter, but because of the thin, rushed note from the captain. In the possession of an unnamed soldier being transferred to a German POW camp, who claimed they belonged to Private First Class Jennings. Unidentified, captured, still holding Evelyn's letters. I held the small bundle of paper Evelyn's 7 letters, my 7 ghost replies, and the captain's cryptic note, and I felt like I was holding a live wire. The world, which had been so tragically certain just minutes ago, had suddenly cracked open into an overwhelming possibility. I was no longer just a caretaker of misplaced sentiments. I was a keeper of a life-altering secret. I spent the next 48 hours functioning on pure automation. I changed dressings. I charted vitals. I supervised the slow, agonizing physiotherapy of men learning to walk again. Every moment was a distraction from the decision I had to make. If I told Evelyn, and if the unnamed soldier was not Tom Jennings, I would be ripping her apart all over again. I would be shattering the piece of certainty that the official letter, however painful, was about to deliver. I would be inviting her back to the terrible, suspended space of missing in action. But if I said nothing and Tom Jennings was alive, starving, and freezing in some German camp, still clinging to the oilskin-wrapped proof of his life back home, then I would be condemning both of them to a lifetime of separation based on my own fear of risk. That thought, that profound, terrible injustice, clawed at me. The air was cooling in the last days of August. The sun set earlier, casting long, bruised shadows across the field hospital tents. We kept the generators running late, pushing back the darkness, though we all knew the real darkness was internal. Margaret, the nurse from Michigan, was working beside me, sterilizing instruments. The metal clinked softly, a mechanical prayer against the rising tide of infection. "You're pale, Beatrice," she observed quietly, not looking up. "Did you finally hear from your dentist fiance?" I managed a weak smile. "Just a long week, Margaret. The patients are demanding." She nodded, understanding the professional shorthand for "I am exhausted beyond measure." But she sensed more. Margaret was sharp. She noticed everything that wasn't said. "This is the hardest time," she murmured, wiping down a scalpel. "The initial rush you run on adrenaline, now it's just the grinding certainty. The war is still out there, and the healing is so slow. It drains you of your will." Her words articulated my internal state perfectly. The war hadn't ended. It had just moved from a frantic sprint to a grueling, endless marathon. And my secret felt like a heavy stone I had to carry for the duration. That night, August 31st, 1944, I knew I had to act. I couldn't just keep staring at the letters. I needed information, and the only person who could provide it was the captain who found the belongings. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper from my diary. I had to be cautious, professional, and utterly ambiguous. I couldn't reveal that I had been hoarding and reading the personal correspondence of PFC Jennings. My letter to the captain. August 31st, 1944. Dear Captain, I am writing in response to your recent communique regarding the personal effects of PFC TH Jennings, recently transferred to a German POW camp. I am Nurse Beatrice Anderson, currently attached to the field hospital. In the course of handling mail for several moving units, we have been redirecting a collection of incoming letters addressed to PFC Jennings. These letters from a sender named Evelyn have been following his unit for some time. We have received notification of PFC Jennings' official status change. However, due to the nature of your report, specifically the mention of a sealed Oilskin wrapped bundle found with the captured soldier. I am contacting you immediately. We're deeply concerned that these letters, which are of intense sentimental value, may continue to circulate between units indefinitely, causing unnecessary emotional strain for the sender, Evelyn. Could you please provide any further details you possess that might confirm the identity of the captured soldier? Specifically, did the personal items include any distinguishing features that might confirm this individual is PFC Jennings? We are trying to ascertain if these remaining letters should be sent to the official deceased archives or held for potential future delivery. We rely on precise details for our record keeping, which directly impacts the morale and processing of information for families back home. We appreciate any information that might help us close this loop definitively. Sincerely, B. Anderson, RNANC. I reread the letter 3 times. It was cold, bureaucratic, and focused entirely on record keeping and unnecessary emotional strain. It betrayed nothing of the lilacs, the yellow kitchen, or my profound, strange intimacy with Evelyn's life. It was a perfect piece of military correspondence. I had to find a way to mail it. This was harder than it sounded. Out here, mail went to the front, or it went home. Sending a letter to an unknown captain whose return address was just a hastily scrawled forward area HQ was an exercise in faith. I took the letter to Lieutenant Miller the next morning. Miller, I said, handing him the sealed envelope. I need this routed urgently. It's related to the Jennings case. Internal records request. Miller looked at the address, frowning. Forward area HQ. Beatrice, this could end up in Gibraltar. You sure this can't wait for the usual courier route? I'm sure, I said firmly. It's time sensitive. We need clarification before we file the final paperwork on the remaining correspondence. He shrugged, already tired. Fine, I'll flag it for the next supply runner heading up that way. Don't hold your breath. This whole system is built on good luck and wishful thinking. I walked away from his tent feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I had cast my line out into the vast, turbulent ocean of the war. Now, the grueling process of waiting began again. September. The weight and the weather of September descended upon us with heavy, unrelenting rain. The ground quickly reverted from dusty field to thick, clinging mud. The hospital atmosphere shifted. The light outside was diffused and gray, and inside, the lanterns burned constantly, casting moving shadows on the tent walls. The patients suffered more in the cold and damp. Infections were harder to manage. The mood was somber. We were moving closer to victory. The news from the front was encouraging, but every step forward cost lives and brought new, terrible burdens to our field of work. During the long, wet nights, I couldn't stop thinking about Tom Jennings. If he was captured, he was likely enduring conditions far worse than the mud and damp we experienced. I thought of Evelyn's words, "I hope you're dry and warm." The irony was cruel. My secret bundle became my constant companion. I would read Evelyn's letters over and over, analyzing her description of Tom. He was always so honest. You had the biggest smile. I was trying to construct a man I had never met, so I could determine if the unnamed soldier, the one who protected her letters, could possibly be him. If the soldier had taken the risk, in the moment of his own capture, to waterproof those letters and claim they belonged to Jennings, then he was either Jennings himself or an incredibly loyal friend. I had to believe it was the former. I had to believe the honesty Evelyn described was real. The days blended into weeks. September 5th, September 10th, September 15th. No reply from the captain. Lieutenant Miller just shrugged whenever I glanced at the outgoing mail pile. The war doesn't prioritize paperwork, Anderson, he'd remind me. It prioritizes wounds. Margaret and I often sat up talking, wrapped in scratchy wool blankets, sharing a tin of biscuits. Do you ever think about home? She asked me one night, her voice low. Constantly, I admitted, but it feels fragile. Like a dream I had a long time ago. I worry I won't fit back in. Margaret confessed. I worry the noise here has changed me so much that the quiet back home will feel deafening. Will the worries about mortgage and new dresses feel meaningless? Evelyn, I found myself saying, catching myself before I could reveal the name. My friend back home. She writes about knitting and gardens. Those things aren't meaningless. They're the whole point. They are the constants we rely on. I realized then that my correspondence with Tom and Evelyn was doing precisely what Margaret feared losing. It was keeping me anchored to the meaning of ordinary life. It was a refusal to let the chaos outside define my inner world. The arrival of the reply, the waiting, finally ended on September 22nd, 1944. The hospital had been surprisingly quiet for 2 days, a strange, nervous calm. The supply truck came late, splashing mud onto the canvas walls. Lieutenant Miller handed me a thick, folded piece of paper with a grim expression. It had been opened and resealed several times, stamped with multiple official unit markings, confirming its long journey across the front. That thing has seen more action than I have, Miller said, rubbing his chin. Hope it answers your records query. I retreated immediately to the supply closet. My heart was pounding, the sound muffled by the rain outside. The paper was brittle, the ink smudged in places. It was dated September 15th. It had taken only 7 days to get to me, which was a logistical miracle in this environment. The captain's confirmation, September 15th, 1944, Nurse Anderson, regarding your query about PFC Jennings. I have reviewed the records and spoken to the medics who handled the transfer. The soldier in question was indeed conscious but severely weakened by exposure and minor wounds when captured. He was incoherent at times. However, he was found clutching the oilskin bundle. When asked who the letters belonged to, he insisted Jennings. My name is Jennings. We initially struggled to identify him definitively because his dog tags were missing. However, the photograph found in his wallet, the picture of the girl with bright eyes you mentioned, had a brief, familiar inscription on the back, Eve, Paris Island, 42. More importantly, the soldier had a specific distinctive tattoo, a small, badly rendered baseball and bat on his left forearm. The medics noted this in the field before he was moved back. PFC Jennings' official file, which we access for comparison purposes, notes this exact tattoo. The conclusion is unofficially clear. The captured soldier who insisted he was PFC Jennings, TH, is almost certainly him. The confusion surrounding his identity was likely due to the chaos of his capture and the lack of tags. He was transferred to a POW processing center, location classified, for movement into the Reich. We have been instructed that once identity is confirmed, the official missing in action will likely convert to prisoner of war status, a tedious process that takes weeks, even months. I have taken the liberty of including the full residential address for Evelyn the sender as listed on his recruitment papers. You will find it appended to this correspondence. Please ensure the remaining correspondence is secured. The soldier demonstrated immense personal risk in protecting those letters. They clearly mean everything to him. Captain, I sat in the cold closet, the smell of sterile cotton suddenly overwhelming. It was Tom. It was Private First Class Jennings. He was alive. He was injured, certainly, and captured, facing unimaginable hardship, but he was alive. And the first thing he did, the thing he protected through capture, was the fragile proof of Evelyn's love. He insisted on his name because he knew those letters, her life, her hope, depended on it. This confirmation brought with it a profound, terrifying new responsibility. Evelyn had received the official letter around late August, early September, the one that told her he was missing, presumed dead. She was grieving, or perhaps entering the slow, deadened state of loss. I had the knowledge, the tangible proof of the tattoo, the baseball bat, the photo inscription that could resurrect his presence in her life. I looked at the residential address, scribbled neatly at the bottom of the captain's letter. 114 Sycamore Street, apartment 2B, Boston, Massachusetts. Boston, my home city. We had been separated by an entire war and an ocean, but we were from the same small, familiar corner of the world. I needed to write to Evelyn. This wasn't a choice anymore. It was a duty, but I couldn't just send the captain's bureaucratic report. I had to deliver the hope gently, wrapped in the emotional context she needed. The final plan, I devised a meticulous, elaborate plan. I would not send my own letters. They were my confession, not hers. I would not sign my name. I would be a silent, benevolent ghost. I gathered Evelyn's 7 remaining letters, including the last, heartbreaking one from August 20th. I placed them inside a new clean envelope. Then I took another sheet of paper. This would be my final correspondence. It wouldn't be addressed to Tom, but to Evelyn. I titled it simply, Information Regarding PFC Jennings, My Letter to Evelyn, The Unsigned Delivery. September 23rd, 1944, Evelyn. I am a nurse who has been managing mail at a field hospital in Normandy. I have never met you, and I have never met Private First Class Tom Jennings, but I have carried your words with me for the past 3 months. I am writing this letter not to cause distress, but to offer a fragile, necessary truth. By now, you have likely received the official notification regarding Tom's status. The confusion of war means that sometimes bureaucracy makes mistakes, and sometimes the men defy the records. We have received information from a trusted source, an army captain who handled Tom's personal effects after an incident that led to his current status. This source has confirmed that Tom is not deceased, but is alive and is now a prisoner of war. I know this status carries its own terrible anxiety, but it is not the permanent loss you are preparing for. He is in the German system, and the conversion from missing to POW is already in process, though it may take weeks or months to become official. The confirmation is rooted in details known only to those closest to him. When he was taken, he was found protecting a small bundle of your earlier letters wrapped in oilskin. When asked his name, he insisted it was Jennings, despite his missing identification. More specifically, the captain noted a small, distinctive tattoo, a baseball, and bat on his left forearm. This detail matches military records. He protected your letters, Evelyn? That is the proof you need. He carried your hope, your love, and your memory of a normal life right through the most terrible moment of his life, and he protected it. I am sending you the remaining letters you wrote. I collected them to prevent them from being discarded or lost. Read them and know that they are proof of your resilience. They kept me anchored to the meaning of home during the worst moments here. Keep planning that yellow kitchen. Keep the blue scarf ready. I pray this small hope gives you the strength you need for the next chapter of waiting. Do not stop believing in him. A nurse in Normandy. I sealed Evelyn's 7 letters and my final anonymous confirmation into a heavy envelope. I addressed it clearly to Evelyn at 114 Sycamore Street, apartment 2B, Boston, Massachusetts. This was the riskiest, yet most necessary, thing I had done since coming to France. It was a breach of protocol, an act of emotional espionage, but it was driven by the knowledge that this fragile hope needed to reach her immediately before the grief solidified. The mailing and the release, I couldn't trust Lieutenant Miller with this. It was too important, too unofficial. I waited until the next afternoon, September 24th, 1944, when a supply driver I knew slightly, a cheerful corporal named David, who was heading back toward the main logistics hub near Cherbourg, was packing up his truck. David, I said, approaching him with the heavy envelope tucked beneath my arm, could you do me a personal favor? This has to go to the States immediately. No military mail stamp. Just needs to get into the normal civilian postal system in the hub. He looked at the address. Boston? Long way from here, nurse. Civilian mail is slow. I know, I said, pulling out a small amount of cash, almost all my saved pay. But it has to go civilian, and it has to go now. Urgent personal business? David saw the seriousness in my eyes. He nodded. Consider it done, Nurse B. We'll get it across the channel with the next batch of returning officers' baggage. I watched him tuck the envelope securely into his personal satchel, away from the military sacks. As the truck pulled away, churning mud and spitting diesel, I felt an extraordinary lightness. The stone I had been carrying was finally gone. I was physically exhausted, but emotionally, I felt drained and clean. I had done the only thing I could do to honor the connection between Tom and Evelyn. I had closed the loop, not with an ending, but with a redirection of hope. October. The long reflection with the burden of the secret lifted, the daily grind of the field hospital seemed almost bearable. The rain continued, heavy and persistent, marking the transition into full autumn. My correspondence with Tom Jennings was over. I no longer had letters to read or ghost replies to write, but the emotional framework of that correspondence remained. I continued to process the war through the lens of Evelyn's life, the yellow kitchen, the lilacs, the honesty of the man who laughed at chaos. I began to focus more intensely on the men who were recovering. They were the future. They were the ones who would walk back into the lives that their loved ones had held in trust for them. One young man, Private Harper, was struggling immensely with the thought of his return. He had lost his left arm below the elbow, and he believed his sweetheart wouldn't want him back. She wrote me perfect letters, nurse, he told me, his voice thick with shame. She wrote about saving money for a new radio, but she didn't write about dealing with this. He gestured miserably to his heavily bandaged stump. I remembered Evelyn's commitment. I remembered her bravery in planning the future despite the terror. She wrote you perfect letters because she loves you, Private, I told him, sitting on the edge of his cot, speaking with the authority gained from reading a stranger's deepest confessions. The woman who loves you enough to write about a new radio is strong enough to handle this. You focus on healing. Her focus is on loving. That's how it works. He looked at me, surprised by the intensity of my words. He didn't know I was channeling Evelyn. The power of the ghost letters extended far beyond the canvas walls of my secret correspondence. They had given me a new, profound purpose to be the guardian of the fragile future, to remind these broken men that the world waiting for them was stronger than the war they had endured. The atmosphere of hope by mid-October, we were firmly entrenched in a stable area. The sound of artillery was now a distant, deep thud, a reminder rather than an imminent threat. The air was crisp and cold. Lieutenant Miller, who had always been harried, was now cracking actual smiles. He received a letter from his wife saying she was taking up ballroom dancing lessons, a direct preparation for his return. She's already planning the celebratory party, Anderson, he chuckled, waving the letter. They're organizing their whole lives around us coming back. They are, I agreed, thinking of the blue scarf and the yellow kitchen. They have immense strength. The waiting was the hardest part for the people back home, but their enduring patience provided the motivation for the war we were fighting. A simple commitment to normalcy was the true armor against despair. I had one final small piece of the Jennings puzzle. I still had my own diary and the 7 ghost replies I had written to Tom. I hadn't mailed them to Evelyn. They were too revealing of my own emotional state. They were a necessary journal of my time here. I spent an evening, October 20th, 1944, reading through them all one last time. I needed to tell someone about the lilacs. I am keeping that blue scarf she bought in mind. It's the love that persists when you are separated by distance and darkness. They were snapshots of my own journey from detached professional to deeply invested witness. They chronicled my struggle to remain human in the face of relentless inhumanity. I carefully tore out the pages of my ghost letters to Tom. I didn't want to destroy them, but I didn't want them in my diary either. They needed their own space. I wrapped them in the oilskin that had originally protected Evelyn's first 3 letters. I tucked this small bundle into the bottom of my kit bag. They were now simply memories, protected and private. November. The confirmation of the unofficial the winter set in early. The tents were icy cold despite the kerosene heaters, and the ground froze hard. On November 10th, 1944, the mail routine brought a new kind of surprise. Lieutenant Miller called me over to the administrative desk. "Anderson," he said, holding up a large, official-looking document. "Remember the Jennings case? The one where you needed all the complicated records clarification?" "Yes, Lieutenant," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, it took them long enough, but the bureaucracy finally caught up with the reality. We received the official transfer order. Private First Class T.H. Jennings is officially classified as a prisoner of war, transferred out of northern France into the Reich." I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly sat down. It was official. The risk I took, the precarious hope I had mailed to Boston, was now fact. "That's excellent news, Lieutenant," I managed. "I'll update the unit files immediately. It's about time," Miller grumbled, stamping the document. "I hate all that Mia limbo. At least now his wife knows where he is." I updated the files, crossing out "missing in action" and writing POW in clean, neat script. I lingered over the name. Jennings, T.H. I felt a surge of proprietary warmth. I knew more about his survival, his capture, and the strength of his love than any official document could ever convey. But what about Evelyn? Had my anonymous letter reached her? Had she believed a stranger's claim over the official notice? The answer came not through mail, but through Lieutenant Miller's endless paperwork. On November 15th, 1944, while sorting through administrative transfers, Miller held up a document, a formal request for aid to families of posts. "Look at this, Anderson," he said, pointing to the address. "Boston, 114 Sycamore Street. This woman, Evelyn Jennings, she filed this request the day after the official Mia classification went out. She's tenacious." I walked over and looked at the paperwork. The request was dated September 28th, 1944, 4 days after I had sent my letter. The form asked for immediate assistance for the family of a POW, and in the small notes section, Evelyn had meticulously typed, "Private Jennings' status is highly likely prisoner of war. Key identifier, baseball tattoo on left forearm." She had believed me. She hadn't just waited for the official papers to catch up. She had used the information from an anonymous nurse to immediately fight the system, bypassing the agonizing wait for bureaucratic confirmation. She had filed the request based on my ghost correspondence and the specific, undeniable details I had provided. The strength of that woman, the one who talked about lilacs and knitting, was breathtaking. She was a quiet force. She planned the yellow kitchen, and then she marched to the War Department, demanding that they recognize her husband was alive, armed only with the information from a stranger. I knew then that my journey with Tom and Evelyn was truly complete. I had delivered the hope, and she had used it to fight for him. The quiet of winter. As the deep cold of late 1944 settled over northern France, our hospital became an increasingly permanent structure. The tents were replaced with wooden prefabricated huts. We were closer to civilization now, operating more like a true military hospital than a desperate triage center. The constant rush faded into a predictable, though still demanding, routine. The world seemed quieter. The constant noise of the initial invasion and subsequent push had receded. The quiet gave me time to reflect on the meaning of my year in Normandy. I had come here to serve, to fix the tangible injuries, but I had found myself serving a much deeper, hidden purpose, the preservation of emotional integrity. The war was a machine designed to strip away memory, hope, and connection. My ghost correspondence with Tom Jennings, fueled by Evelyn's perfect, ordinary life, had been my internal act of resistance against that machine. It had forced me to feel, to observe, and to value the small things that defined home. I thought of Evelyn often, knowing she was now locked into the agonizing, distant worry of a POW wife. But it was a worry infused with certainty. She knew he was alive. She knew he had protected her letters. That knowledge was a powerful antidote to the absolute despair of assumed loss. I had never revealed my secret to Margaret or to Lieutenant Miller. It remained my intimate, private lesson learned on the battlefield. One evening, December 15th, 1944, Margaret and I were tending to the stove in our small hut, trying to warm up canned beans. "Do you know what I miss most about home?" Margaret asked, stirring the beans slowly. "The predictability. Knowing that when you flip a switch, the light will turn on. Knowing that when you send a letter, someone you love will read it." I looked down at my hands, the hands that felt ancient, that had handled so much blood and so much paper. "Predictability is a luxury, Margaret," I said softly, my voice filled with the weight of experience. "But there's a strength in knowing that even when the light switch doesn't work, and even when the letter doesn't reach its destination, the connection still exists. The hope survives the transmission failure. That's the real lesson of this war." Margaret looked at me, a thoughtful crease in her brow. "You've changed, Beatrice. You used to just talk about the anatomy of wounds. I learned that the deepest wounds aren't physical," I replied. "They're the ones caused by silence and the lack of certain knowledge." And then I changed the subject. "The secret remained safe, translated into wisdom I could share, but not into a story I could tell. The post-war promise, the war ended for us in the spring of 1945, when the official orders came through for the redeployment of the field hospitals. We were not needed in Europe anymore. We were going home. The journey was long and slow. As we prepared to cross the Atlantic, I finally had time to revisit my small bundle of memories, my 7 ghost letters to Tom. I realized I didn't need them anymore. They had served their purpose. They were the bridge that carried me through the chaos. I stood on the deck of the transport ship, the salt spray cold against my face. The ship was quiet, filled with tired, reflective professionals. I pulled out the oilskin-wrapped pages. I didn't burn them. That seemed too aggressive. Instead, I tore them into small, thin strips and scattered them over the vast gray expanse of the ocean. "I'm keeping that blue scarf she bought in mind. I hope wherever you are, that you are at peace." The fragments disappeared instantly into the wakes of the ship, returning my confessions to the anonymity of the sea. They were now just part of the vast, untold stories of the war. One kept only 2 items: Evelyn's first letter, the one about the lilacs and the porch swing, and the captain's note detailing the baseball tattoo. These were the anchors of the entire experience. Boston, 1946. It took many months for the final processes of demobilization to complete. I returned to Boston in the late spring of 1946, a civilian again, a nurse again, but fundamentally altered. The city was loud, fast, and aggressively happy. The air smelled of clean asphalt and victory. I took a position back at St. Jude's, and the orderly chaos of the emergency room felt mundane after the constant life-or-death urgency of the field tents. I bought a small apartment near the hospital. I settled into the quiet, often listening to the silence that Margaret had feared. But for me, the silence was a comfort, a testament to the fact that the guns were quiet. I never intended to contact Evelyn. I was a ghost who had intervened. My job was done. My identity as a nurse in Normandy had to remain a secret, but curiosity and the simple need for final, certain closure persisted. On a rainy Saturday in June 1946, 2 years exactly after I first arrived in Normandy, I took a streetcar to the old neighborhood near Sycamore Street. I had Evelyn's address, 114 Sycamore Street, apartment 2B, committed to memory. The street was lined with sycamore trees, their bark peeling in a dusty brown pattern. It was an old working-class neighborhood full of brick apartment buildings. I stood across the street, huddled under my umbrella. I wasn't going to knock. I just needed to see the building where the yellow kitchen lived. Apartment 2B was on the second floor. The window was open slightly, letting out the faint scent of baking bread, and then I saw the curtains. They were a cheerful, soft yellow, hanging in a newly painted kitchen. The color was exactly the shade Evelyn had described, the color of sunshine pouring onto the table. I watched for a moment longer. I saw a figure move near the window, a woman, her hair pulled back, strong and purposeful. It must have been Evelyn. She was setting a small vase of flowers on the windowsill. Lilacs, I hoped, though the rain obscured my view. And then a man came into the frame. He was tall, thin, but clearly strong. He moved slowly, deliberately, supporting himself slightly on the back of a chair. His left shirt sleeve was rolled up, and as he reached to adjust the vase, I saw it. The faint, faded outline of a tattoo, the badly rendered baseball bat. He smiled at Evelyn, a smile that seemed to light up the small yellow kitchen despite the gloom of the rain outside. It was Tom, Private First Class T.H. Jennings, home. He reached out and took Evelyn's hand. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. They stood there, suspended in a perfect, ordinary moment of reunion and peace. The Ferris wheel had stopped, and they had landed safely. I stood in the rain, watching the final, quiet confirmation of their life together. I was an anonymous witness to the end of their war. I didn't need to knock. I didn't need recognition. My role was complete. The connection I had fostered, the hope I had delivered, had survived the storm. The yellow kitchen was real. The lilacs were blooming. I turned and walked back toward the streetcar, leaving them to their quiet, hard-won peace. I knew I would carry the memory of that yellow kitchen and the incredible, enduring strength of those ghost letters with me always. They taught me that even in the deepest shadow, the smallest light, the light of ordinary love, can survive, and sometimes even triumph. The life of a nurse in wartime teaches you that every wound requires two things: steady hands to treat the damage, and an unwavering belief in the resilience of the human spirit to guide the healing. My hands treated the injuries of the body, but Evelyn's words and Tom's survival treated the deep, reflective wounds of my soul. They proved that the fragile fabric of home was strong enough to endure the separation, the silence, and the ultimate test of war. The story of the letters was not a tragedy of misdelivery, but a testament to the power of commitment. Commitment so strong that it crossed an ocean and bypassed bureaucracy. Guided only by the persistent heart of a woman who refused to stop writing and a nurse who refused to stop listening.